Hey everyone, welcome back to this week's episode. Today I want to walk you through a conversation I had within the last month or two with a married couple. We're just going to do like a case study, walk you through their primary goals and their concerns. Just to give you a little background on this household, what they did is they actually came to two of my retirement master classes. So they voluntarily raised their hand and said, we're going to invest some time to try to learn some the ins and outs and some strategies out there about some retirement planning concepts we might not be aware of. So after about 4 to 4.5 hours, again, they voluntarily raised their hand and said, hey, this stuff's super important to us. I don't think we can figure it out on our own. We value advice. So I kind of want to walk you through a conversation that I had, take the names away, of a married couple I had within the last 1 to 2 weeks, and then really look at it, some potential solutions from a high level view of keep it simple to potentially address some of those goals and concerns that they did have to start prepping them for not the finish line at retirement, but basically today and the next 30 to 35 years of their life.
This is Retire Ready, where we break down retirement planning and make it easy to understand so you can live your golden years to the fullest. Planning your retirement starts now with your host, Kyle Hammerschmidt.
So let's just do a brief background here. So we have John and Jane Hopeful. John's date of birth is January of 1958, so he's 66, almost getting ready to turn 67. And then we have Jane Hopeful, who was born in February of 1958, who's also getting ready to turn 67. And their goal was to potentially have John retire December of 2025, so within the next 12 to 16 months. Jane was a domestic engineer, so she was a stay-at-home, kind of raising the kids and the family, taking on debt, never really went back to work. So as far as a background situation, John's earned wages or taxable wages that would show up on his tax return, which I looked at, was at $218,000 per year. And again, Jane didn't bring in any income sources. And then, like I said, John's planned retirement date was 2025. So again, we're talking 12 to 16 months away from that potential retirement date. From a retirement aspect of total assets, what are the resources you have to fund your retirement? I get this question all the time. It's well, how much does the typical person have that you talk to or work with? Or what does the typical person need for retirement? Or what's the average person have? And there's all these surveys out there, but they don't really lay out the situation. So at the end of the day, they had around $2.2 to $2.3 million, depending on the day in the market, kind of tucked away for retirement. That doesn't include the money they had set aside in money market account and cash, which was about another 200 and some $1,000. And of the total assets, only about 200,000 of the 2.2 to 2.3 was in Roth. So 2.1 is a tax-deferred funnel. When they take it out, they'll pay federal taxes. It could potentially make their Social Security more taxable. And about 200,000 is already been growing tax-free, and they can spend it tax-free. So from their aspect, that's kind of how that looks. As it sits today, Social Security-wise, like I said, Jane is kind of a domestic engineer right now, but she did have some working credits prior to that. So they're going to be both qualified for their own Social Securities if they want to. John's full retirement age benefit is around $3,500 per month, and Jane's full retirement benefit is around $2,200 per month. They don't really have, any indications of when they thought they were going to take their Social Security, even though when you look at your Social Security statement online or the one you get mailed, it does say the longer you wait, the higher the payment could be. Just remember that's a gross payment. So we're kind of just giving you a background of what are their resources they have. So they'll both be qualified for their own Social Security. Remember, Jane is a domestic engineer for the last 10 years, so she hasn't been putting in. And what are their primary planning concerns? Where are they at with their situation? So again, they each have primary insurance amount, which is Social Security. The goal within the plan was to not raise the household Social Security by more than 1%. So in 2025, Social Security is getting a COLA of 2.5%. But within the plan, we're going to do plan for the worst, hope for the best. So we're only going to raise that by 1%. And we'll even test it at flat. From an essential spending perspective, $8,000 per month was what was wanted to cover those essentials, but they also have non-essential expenses, which we'll bring up in a little bit. But those essential expenses are $8,000 per month. Those will basically always be there while they're both living. We're going to raise that by 4% every year. So really, in 18 years, the $7,000 essential expenses per month will now cost $14,000 per month to kind of drive home to make sure the portfolio is growing enough during retirement so they don't get like too conservative to where they might lose purchasing power. They have 3 adult children and 6 grandkids. However, when we talk about legacy and passing money on, they don't really have any set legacy goals. They understand that there will be money left behind. They kind of, when we walk through and educate people on like different spending strategies and what would be left behind if you do it like this, again, that's kind of, doing some forecasting. They would rather do the giving while they're living. So there's no legacy goals. They just want to use and enjoy their money while they're earlier in retirement, but also use some of that to do more family stuff in exchange for like leaving less money behind after they're gone. So that kind of gives you an idea of where they're at on that. So their primary concern would be, number one, maximize the money they can spend early in retirement without sacrificing longevity of their savings. So it's like, hey, if we live too long, what would this look like? So life expectancy on the plan's going to go 90 for Jane and 85 for John. But like, how can we actually spend more early on in retirement without like sacrificing the longevity of the savings? And so there's basically, we're going to recap probably like, let's just do like the top 3 ways to kind of do retirement spending strategies. Number one is the most popular, often used in like Monte Carlo simulations or since the mid to late 80s. That's the static withdrawal rate, inflation adjusted, which is the 4% rule. So if we just did some basic math here, if they have $2 million and they're going to take out 4%, it's just saying take out $80,000 gross per year from the portfolio on top of whatever other sources you have, plus your Social Security. That's what the 4% rule. So it means take out this starting value, increase it with inflation every year. However, what we have found is that really falls short in addressing uncertainties such as unpredictable market returns, so AKA like the sequence of returns, and it might set you up to underspend in your early years. So really the plan might design you to do 4% with no, smaller inflation adjustments up front, but then it's ramping up portfolio withdrawals at the end of life. So again, if you're really trying to enjoy that money sooner, this might not be the strategy for you. And another thing is like these static withdrawal rates do not consider potential changes in your behavior over the length of your retirement. So it's not just like, hey, sometimes I need $5, $10, $15, $30,000 out for this. So it's not really setting you up to potentially spend more early on. So that's one downside. It's not like you can't use the 4% rule. The next would be the stage spending. So again, think about this like you got go-go years, slow-go years, and no-go years, or like a spending smile. It's a simple approach that really accounts for the behavior of aspects of aging and the impact of expenses. So it might show you ramping up your non-essential expenses your first 5 to 10 years, knowing that in year 11, as you age, some of these non-essentials like a bunch of travel or whatever you're doing might dip at some point in the future. And then you have your no-go years when it's like, hey, when we're 81, we just have our essential expenses. So that's one strategy. And then the last one is basically the income guardrails approach, which we talk about a lot, which we use in our practice, is really setting up some guardrails saying, here's your spending capacity to avoid underspending early. If your portfolio value hits this amount, you can start spending this much more per month. And the only time you would ever have to make an adjustment to your spending is if you hit your bottom guardrail, saying, hey, if your portfolio falls from here to 1.2, you need to adjust your spending from 12,500 down to 11,800 to keep the plan on track. So that's just kind of the guardrail approach as we look at everything. So now let's take a look at what would it look like for this household if we kind of move on through their concerns. So they want to do the income guardrails. Number 2 is they're concerned about having way too much in tax-deferred accounts. Like, hey guys, congrats, you've done a great job at saving, but now we're talking about getting down the mountain, and they've kind of came to the realization they might have a tax problem. They would prefer to take Social Security earlier than wait till 70. However, they just want to know the pros and the cons of doing this, but they also want to understand like what's the cost and like how do I take Social Security in the most tax efficient manner around our retirement savings. They would prefer not to overpay their favorite uncle in federal taxes. So saying, hey, what's out there? What type of strategies could we implement to take control of our tax planning, so we don't like voluntarily like not think about it and ignore it, and all of a sudden we could have done XYZ and controlled our tax bills, but we didn't take control of it, and all of a sudden our tax bills started going up as we aged in retirement. But they also, their concern was not understanding like the pros and the cons of doing like Roth conversions. And then last, like I said, use the guardrail approach. They want to know before they pull the trigger, like as their portfolios go up and down, what's the value it need to hit to adjust their spending as they go through retirement. So let's move on to kind of looking at an idea of what their spending strategy would look like in retirement. So desired retirement income was about 8,000 for essentials, but really their target was with non-essentials and essentials about $120,000 per year. So their income adjustment plan, and that's what I like to call it, is like it's not just like here's your plan. It's like income adjustments. Hey, there's going to be adjustments to income as stuff happens in the markets and tax rates in your life. So their plan as it sits today, if we set up the guardrail approach, after tax, I would be recommending if they went down this path, if they want to spend more in their early years, is $15,500 per month. Now it could be 15,600, 15,800, or 15,000, but about $15,000 per year after tax, if they truly wanted to like spend more in their early years. Now, this is way over the limit of like what they wanted, but it does allow them to know they do have some flexibility within their plan. So that kind of puts them at an average life expectancy. So basically the plan's lasting 29.8 years. That's them living 60% longer than the average person born, average person their age. That also puts them in an income adjustment spending. So there's a 20% risk of overspending and an 80% risk of underspending. And from a guardrails approach, we're going to assume they're going to be around 2.494 when they retire. If their portfolio were to rise in retirement or rise way above that when they were to retire, like around $3,028,000, we'd be recommending they could spend around $18,000 per month in retirement. And their income adjustment downward, they would need to go from 2.4 or 2.5 down to 1.9. And we would recommend they adjust their spending down to about 14,000 to 14,800. So again, they're really just getting rid of some non-essential expenses at that time. Next, from a Social Security perspective, it would make sense based upon what they want and long-term calculations, that John would take his Social Security at 68, which would be January of 2026. And that's going to pay him roughly about $46,000 per year, as long as he's living. And then Jane would also file at the exact same time, but in January in 2026. And that's going to add up to about $29,000 per year. So 46,000 plus 29,000. Now, if we go run some calculations here and just say, okay, let's take their date of birth, their Social Securities, and like their their lifespan of 85 and 90. And the calculator normally with that type of long life expectancy is really going to typically say, wait till 70 to take your Social Security. You'll collect more over your lifetime. But if we just run a comparison and say, all right, what are we leaving on the table if we take Social Security January 1, 2026 versus taking it at 70, which is the primary strategy to get more over our lifetime? The break-even point from a cumulative perspective would be at age 84. At age 84, that's when you would break even from the cumulative benefits collected. So if they lived till 82 and passed away, they won. If they lived till 90, the calculator says, hey guys, you should have waited to take your Social Security. You would have collected more from the Social Security Administration. I just kind of ask people, hey, at age 90, if you're still living, would you be mad that you left a potential, $80 to $120,000 on the table from Social Security? And most people are like, no, because I used it up front. I took it in a cost tax efficient manner. Now you got to keep in mind, like, are you married or you're not? But at the end of the day, Social Security is not about when you claim, it's how you claim. So I was perfectly fine with them taking it January 1, 2026. Heck, that's when I recommended it. But we also have to look at it from a tax perspective of when we get to a point in retirement, that number is going to be about $75,000 coming in from Social Security. So $75,780. Based upon the plan we're going to implement, about 40,000 and change is going to be subject. So 40,000 is taxable. So there's 35,000 of that Social Security that's not taxable over their lifetime. So yeah, by implementing some tax planning during some years, that's going to allow them to keep more of their Social Security in retirement. Next, when you look at their tax strategy, they are in a 22% marginal bracket right now. Their average tax rate on all of their income is 14.2. Within that 22% bracket, they have about $15,000 of room before they'd start going up into the 24% bracket. However, based upon just like their concerns and their long-term goals, they definitely want to consider going into the 24% bracket if they truly want to lower like that lifetime tax bill. The target to get to the point where it would actually make sense long-term is they get enough money converted or spent down in retirement to where they're required minimum distributions, or they're only taking out about $45,000 from IRAs and 401ks. And they can get it to a point where they have about $24,000 per year coming in from a Roth IRA income. So if they can get to that point, $45,000 of IRA distributions, $75,000 of Social Security, $40,000 would be subject to tax. They also have the Roths coming in. If you just run a quick analysis of what this would look like, that means at that point, they have their average marginal tax bracket would be 15% married filing jointly with the tax laws. And the average tax rate on all those dollars is 7.9%. Like, that's the sweet spot. The average is about 7.9% for this household. Now, from a Roth conversion perspective, we looked at their 2024 base, but if we look at the 2024 scenario, if they really wanted to like fill up that 24% bracket, they would do about $198,000 of Roth conversions in 2024. On that $198,000, they would owe federally around $47,000 to $48,000 in federal taxes. And it would probably make sense to use some of that money market or that cash that's set aside to start paying those future taxes. So they could do about $198,000 this year. And then again, the following year in 2025, they do around $198,000 to $200,000. And then from 2026 to 2029, wages go away. They would have some Social Security coming in. They're going to be living on their IRA withdrawals and doing Roth conversions for about 4 more years. So basically, they're front-loading Roth conversions the first 2 years. If tax laws change in 2026, they're going to do Roth conversions, but not as much. And then their strategy, most Roth conversion strategies in general are about 4 to 10 years. So by 2030, they're kind of locked in to start optimizing all their different funnels. So why would this make sense? So look at some solutions here. They feel comfortable. They just want tax-free income in the future. They understand the pros and the cons. They want to be better positioned for those first 10 years of retirement because they don't know like what the markets are going to do. They're long-term minded. They're okay if they pay extra tax now in exchange for paying less long-term. They understand like if they only live 10 years, more than likely the surviving spouse or their beneficiaries will reap the rewards of all their decisions. And they really want to design stuff now so they can kind of spend more in those early go-go years. So from an investment perspective, we want to design this by building out a financial plan first. That means like doing your income, your tax, your healthcare, doing all the work up front, and that will dictate kind of how hard the money has to work and how it should be invested. So their internal rates of returns between now and when they retire, the target was 6.4% internal rate of return. And then during retirement is 5.8%. From an investment perspective, we're going to look at building like a stable war chest. That means we're going to use investment strategies that work best short and long term. So if they're going to take out $60,000 a year from their portfolio on top of Social Security, or 80,000, or let's just say it's 100 grand, we're going to set 5 years of portfolio income aside in maybe like U.S. Treasuries. So they're going to set like 500 grand aside in some stable U.S. Treasuries. So as the markets go up, maybe the market tanks right when they retire, they're going to live on their U.S. Treasuries and kind of let their stocks perform. The remaining of the portfolio is basically going to be invested in like a diversified equity portfolio. Maybe it's like dividend growth stocks, dividend payers, and like non-dividend payers like growth companies and tech. So they can kind of let their money grow long term, set some money aside in short term. Again, at the end of the day, the goal would be your plan. Like, what does your plan look like? This is just a high level case study. We don't want to dive into the weeds. I hope everybody, like, their plan's like smooth sailing, like they retire into a bull market, maybe taxes don't go up, they time everything right. But more than likely, you're going to be facing some adversity. You might retire into a bear market. You might retire, and then in year 5, taxes go up. So the whole point of laying out and planning all this information out and strategies is to prepare you for those not so good times. So I hope this episode today gave you some clarity of some ideas and some of your goals and what are your concerns to start addressing those, because the earlier you take action, again, at the end of the day, I always say doing nothing changes nothing. What are your goals? What are your concerns? What do you have? What do you want to start planning for? Does it make sense to start investing time to learn about it? Or does it make sense to start investing, to start paying somebody to address these for you?
You've been listening to Retire Ready with Kyle Hammerschmidt. Planning your retirement starts now. We hope you've enjoyed the show. If you did, make sure to like, rate, and review. We'll be back soon.